Racist police captain slams John Kennedy against car, then learns Kennedy outranks him by law. Captain Derek Sullivan barreled across the federal courthouse parking lot, his voice barking orders at 3 junior officers shoving past courthouse security with the arrogance of a man who believed his badge granted him absolute power. In a flash of rage, he seized the arm of a well-dressed man, slamming him against his patrol car with a force that echoed through the humid Atlanta night. "You're under arrest for interfering with police business," the 20-year veteran roared, pressing his knee into the man's back. But the man unflinched responded with a calm that cut through the chaos. "Captain, I am Senator John Kennedy, and you need to step back immediately." Sullivan laughed a bitter mocking sound until the man recited his badge number, his supervisor's name, and the exact federal statute he was violating, details only someone with towering authority could wield. What Sullivan didn't know was that this single act of racist aggression would unleash a storm of consequences he couldn't imagine. He thought he was dealing with just another citizen who needed to learn their place. He was dead wrong. The next 72 hours would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, authority, and the price of his arrogance. This is the story of how one catastrophic decision destroyed a career, exposed a corrupt system, and proved that no one is above the law. It was a sticky evening outside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in Atlanta, Georgia, when 2 vastly different worlds collided in a way that would echo across the nation. Senator John Kennedy had just wrapped up a grueling day of work, his mind sharp from years of advocating for justice and integrity in the halls of power. Known for his razor-sharp intellect, unwavering commitment to the rule of law, and ability to remain composed under pressure, Kennedy carried a leather briefcase stuffed with critical legislative documents as he made his way to his car in the courthouse's secure parking garage. His presence exuded the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades fighting for what was right, never backing down from a challenge. 3 blocks away, Captain Derek Sullivan was stewing in the worst month of his 20-year career. Budget cuts had tightened the screws from the mayor's office, his clearance rates had plummeted, and Internal Affairs was sniffing around complaints about his team's heavy-handed tactics. At 52, Sullivan saw himself as an old-school cop, one who believed respect was earned through fear and control. Tonight, he was leading a routine operation that had turned up nothing but dead ends and frustrated officers. When the call came in suspicious activity near the federal courthouse, multiple individuals loitering, Sullivan's jaw clenched. Federal property meant federal oversight paperwork and complications. But he never shied away from asserting his dominance, no matter the jurisdiction. As Senator Kennedy reached his car, he noticed an unsettling scene unfolding nearby. 3 police cruisers had boxed in a group of young men in the visitor parking area, their postures tense and aggressive. With the keen eye of someone who had spent years scrutinizing systems of power, Kennedy sensed something was off. The men appeared to be courthouse staff, likely leaving late shifts. Yet the officers' stance suggested confrontation rather than inquiry. Sullivan screeched onto the scene in his department-issued Ford Explorer emergency lights slicing through the night. His irritation boiled over as he saw his officers detaining what turned out to be federal court clerks. "This is a damn waste of time," he growled to Officer Mike Torres, his newest recruit. "But since we're here, let's make sure everyone knows who's in charge." Senator Kennedy, observing from a distance, recognized the dangerous shift in energy. He'd seen officers like Sullivan before, men whose egos drove them to trample constitutional rights in the name of authority. Guided by duty, Kennedy locked his car and strode toward the scene, determined to ensure proper procedures were followed on federal ground. "Excuse me, officers," he said, his voice clear and commanding, honed by years of addressing packed Senate chambers. "I'd like to understand the legal basis for this detention." Sullivan spun around, his face flushed with fury. In the dim glow of the parking lot lights, he saw a man in his 70s, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase, daring to question his command. Every prejudice, every frustration, every ounce of wounded pride fused into a white-hot rage. But what Sullivan couldn't see was that this man held the power to unravel his entire career, triggering federal mechanisms that would expose 2 decades of corruption. Every second was captured by the courthouse's unblinking security cameras, recording a moment that would soon dominate headlines. Senator Kennedy's career was built on a foundation of integrity and an encyclopedic knowledge of the law. He knew federal civil rights statutes like the back of his hand, from the letter of the law to the mechanisms that could hold violators accountable. He understood the weight of federal property and the protocols that governed it. Sullivan, on the other hand, was the embodiment of everything Kennedy stood against. His personnel file, if anyone bothered to dig, would reveal a trail of complaints: excessive force, racial bias, witnesses, silenced evidence, lost settlements, hushed up by the city. Sullivan had thrived by cultivating a network of protection-loyal supervisors, friendly politicians, and community leaders he'd charmed. For 20 years, he'd operated with impunity. But tonight, he was about to meet his match. "Sir, this is police business," Sullivan snapped, his tone demanding instant obedience. "Step back and let us handle this." Kennedy stood his ground, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who'd faced down opponents in high-stakes debates without flinching. "I'm simply asking for the legal basis of this detention," he replied, his voice steady, but edged with authority that should have signaled danger. Officers Torres, Jackson, and Martinez exchanged uneasy glances. They knew Sullivan's temper, but something about this man, his precise language, his calm defiance, set him apart. Sullivan's face darkened. In his world, order was maintained by enforcing a clear hierarchy, and this man was disrupting it. "I'm not asking again," he growled, stepping closer. "Move now, or you're in cuffs." The detained clerks, recognizing Kennedy from his public work, watched in growing alarm, too distant to intervene. Kennedy's eyes flicked to Sullivan's badge number 2847, name D. Sullivan. He noted the other officers' badges, cataloging details with the precision of a seasoned legislator. "Captain Sullivan," he said, his voice deliberate, "there seems to be confusion about jurisdiction. This is federal property, and these individuals appear to be federal employees." The use of his name and rank should have been a red flag. Civilians didn't address officers so precisely, but Sullivan was too consumed by anger to notice. What Sullivan didn't know was that this moment would expose a pattern he'd buried for decades. Senator Kennedy wasn't just a public servant. He was a U.S. senator with the authority to demand immediate federal oversight of law enforcement misconduct, and he'd long advocated for accountability in policing. What happened next would be dissected on news networks, studied in law schools, and remembered as a turning point. Sullivan stepped within inches of Kennedy. His fists clenched, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't care who you think you are," he snarled. "You're about to learn what happens when you defy an order." Kennedy, unshaken, responded with the weight of his Senate authority. "Captain Sullivan, I'm Senator John Kennedy, and you are violating federal statute 18 U.S.C. 242, which prohibits depriving constitutional rights under color of law." The words landed like a thunderclap. Torres took a step back. Jackson's hand eased from his holster, and Martinez glanced nervously at the cameras. But Sullivan, blinded by rage, heard only defiance. "I don't give a damn who you are," he shouted. "You're interfering, and you'll learn respect." Kennedy stood motionless, mentally logging every violation, knowing the cameras preserved it all. The other officers sensed disaster. Torres looked sick. "Captain, maybe we should—" "Shut it," Torres Sullivan snapped. "This guy thinks he's above us." Kennedy made one final attempt. "Captain, contact your supervisor before this escalates." To Sullivan, it was a challenge to his very identity. With officers watching and the courthouse looming, he made his fatal choice. He grabbed Kennedy's arm, shoved him against the patrol car, and slammed his knee into his back. The briefcase hit the ground, papers scattering in the breeze. "You're under arrest!" he bellowed, reaching for cuffs. That thud was the sound of Sullivan's career imploding. The officers' faces drained of color. Assaulting a U.S. senator was a federal crime triggering FBI involvement. Torres saw federal seals on the papers. "Captain, stop." But Sullivan, lost in his need for control, ignored him, unaware of the security guards closing in. Kennedy, face against cold metal, remained composed. Badge 2847, Supervisor Morrison, Extension 4477. This carries 10 years in federal prison. The precision stunned. Jackson whispered, "He's really a senator." Martinez's body cam captured a catastrophic mistake. Federal SUVs roared in agents emerging. "Supervisory Special Agent Maria Santos, U.S. Marshals." "Release him now." Sullivan stammered. "He was interfering." "That's Senator John Kennedy." Santos cut in. "Hands off." The name hit like a sledgehammer. Sullivan's hands fell, cuffs clattering, face ashen. Kennedy straightened, gathered his papers with Torres's reluctant help, and faced Sullivan with unyielding dignity. What followed would expose a corrupt empire because assaulting a senator triggered unstoppable federal consequences, proving no one, not even a badge, stands above the law. In the chaotic aftermath of that fateful shove in the federal courthouse parking lot, Captain Derek Sullivan stood frozen, his world crumbling as federal agents swarmed the scene like guardians of justice itself. The air was thick with tension, emergency lights casting eerie shadows across the asphalt, while Senator John Kennedy, ever the pillar of composure and integrity, brushed off his suit and reclaimed his scattered documents with the help of a wide-eyed Officer Torres. Sullivan's mind raced, replaying the moment he had dismissed the warnings, ignored the red flags, and let his racist fury take control. He had crossed a line that no amount of backpedaling could erase. And now the full weight of federal authority was bearing down on him. What Sullivan couldn't yet grasp was how this one act of arrogance would ignite a chain reaction, pulling back the curtain on years of hidden misconduct and forcing a reckoning that would shake the foundations of his department. Senator Kennedy, with his unyielding commitment to the rule of law, had just become the catalyst for an investigation that would expose it all. As agents from the U.S. Marshals Service secured the area. Supervisory Special Agent Maria Santos took command, her voice cutting through the night like a blade of accountability. "Captain Sullivan, you are now the subject of a federal inquiry," she stated firmly, her team already coordinating with the FBI's Atlanta field office. The protocols had activated seamlessly, Federal Protective Service alerts for threats to high-ranking officials, Marshals' mandates for assault investigations, and FBI civil rights reviews kicked in without delay. Sullivan watched in horror as evidence technicians photographed the scuff marks on his patrol car, collected Kennedy's briefcase as potential Exhibit A, and downloaded footage from the overlapping courthouse cameras. Every frame captured his aggression, his knee pressed into Kennedy's back, his shouts echoing with unchecked bias. Kennedy, meanwhile, provided a detailed statement to Agent Santos, his memory as sharp as his legislative acumen, reciting the sequence of events with the precision that had made him a respected voice in national debates on justice and reform. The ripple effects spread like wildfire through the channels of federal power. Within hours, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta was briefed, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, a veteran of civil rights prosecutions, took the lead. Torres had built a reputation for dismantling cases of police overreach, and this one assault on a sitting U.S. senator promised to be a landmark. Senator Kennedy Torres said in a late-night call, his tone respectful and determined, "We're filing charges under 18 U.S.C. 242 for deprivation of rights under color of law and 18 U.S.C. 245 for federally protected activities with bias motivation. The evidence is ironclad and we'll push for the maximum penalties." Kennedy, back in his office despite the ordeal, responded with his characteristic calm. "Do what the law requires, Mr. Torres. This isn't about me. It's about ensuring no one misuses their authority to trample on constitutional rights." Kennedy's poise under pressure only amplified his stature. He continued his work that very night, reviewing legislative briefs and preparing for upcoming sessions embodying the resilience that had defined his public service. His deep understanding of the system allowed him to navigate the chaos without missing a beat, turning a personal attack into an opportunity to advocate for broader accountability. Sullivan, on the other hand, was unraveling. Relieved of duty on the spot by Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, who arrived with Department Counsel David Richardson in tow, Sullivan was escorted away under the watchful eyes of federal agents. Morrison's face was a mask of barely contained panic as he whispered, "Derek, what the hell have you done? This is federal. There's no sweeping it under the rug." Richardson, sweating through his suit, tried to interject with Kennedy, but the senator politely deferred. "All communications through the proper channels, gentlemen." Back at home, Sullivan paced his living room, the weight of impending doom crushing him. His wife Linda sat in stunned silence, the reality sinking in that their comfortable life built on his badge and the perks it brought might vanish overnight. Phone calls from union reps and fellow officers flooded in, but their questions only amplified his dread. How could he explain mistaking a senator for a meddlesome civilian? Why hadn't he heeded the officers' hesitations or Kennedy's warnings? As the night wore on, the FBI's investigation deepened with Special Agent Jennifer Walsh leading the charge. Walsh, a no-nonsense expert in police misconduct cases, dove into Sullivan's records with forensic precision. What she uncovered was a damning pattern. 43 complaints of excessive force over 2 decades. 27 allegations of racial bias. 15 city settlements hushed up to avoid scrutiny, and 7 internal affairs probes that mysteriously concluded with insufficient evidence despite compelling testimony. "This isn't isolated," Walsh reported to her superiors. "There's a network here. Supervisors enabling witnesses, intimidated reports, doctored." Her spotlight soon fell on Lieutenant Michael Foster, the internal affairs detective who had handled every Sullivan complaint. Emails revealed Foster coaching Sullivan on phrasing incident reports to evade red flags. Phone logs showed pre-interview coordination, and financial ties hinted at mutual favors, like Sullivan's testimony securing Foster a promotion. By dawn, federal agents raided Foster's home, arresting him on charges of conspiracy to violate civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 241. Foster's stunned protests did nothing to halt the momentum subpoenas flew for department files, body cam footage, and witness statements long buried. The probe expanded, implicating a web of protection that had allowed Sullivan to operate unchecked, costing the city millions in secret payouts. Kennedy, monitoring updates through secure channels, emphasized the systemic angle Agent Walsh. This goes beyond one officer. It's a failure of oversight that breeds such arrogance. His input, drawn from years of pushing for police reform, shaped the investigation's direction, ensuring it targeted not just individuals, but the structures that enabled them. Sullivan's personal fallout intensified as word spread through the department. Officers who once admired his tough style now distanced themselves, whispering about the body cam video that captured every damning second. The police union's attorney, Sarah Martinez, delivered the grim news: Derek, the feds have video witnesses and a victim who's unimpeachable. Plea for reduced time and cooperate. It's your only shot. But cooperation meant turning on Foster and others, unraveling the very network that had shielded him. At home, arguments with Linda escalated. She packed a bag, unable to fathom the ruin his actions had wrought. Sullivan stared at his academy photo, the proud young cop, now a symbol of his downfall, haunted by the realization that his racist snap judgment had invited federal scrutiny he couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Kennedy's steadfast demeanor inspired those around him. Federal agents commended his cooperation, and colleagues in the Senate reached out with support, reinforcing his role as a beacon of principled leadership. As the investigation ballooned, local media caught wind, but national outlets like CNN grasped the gravity. A senator's assault exposes deep-rooted police issues in Atlanta. Civil rights groups rallied, using the case to highlight systemic bias. Sullivan's name trended online, his face plastered across screens as a cautionary tale. The charges mounted with Torres, preparing a grand jury presentation that included hate crime enhancements, given the evident racial undertones in Sullivan's rage. Kennedy, undeterred, returned to his duties the next day, his experience fueling his advocacy for stronger federal oversight. What began as a parking lot clash was now a federal firestorm, with Sullivan's career in ashes and the department teetering on the brink of reform. But the consequences were far from over. The probe was just beginning to unearth the full extent of the corruption, setting the stage for a transformation that would redefine accountability in law enforcement. The department scrambled, with Chief Robert Hayes convening emergency meetings to assess the damage. This could trigger a pattern and practice investigation under 42 U.S.C. 104-141. Hayes warned his team, knowing federal monitors could impose costly changes. Morrison, now under scrutiny for his ties to Sullivan, felt the noose tightening. Foster's arrest sent shockwaves. Other officers whispered about their own roles in the cover-ups, fearing subpoenas next. Sullivan, isolated and desperate, contemplated the plea: 7 years in federal prison for spilling on the network. It meant losing his pension, his home, his identity as a cop. As agents pored over records, more victims emerged, their stories of Sullivan's abuses finally seeing light. Kennedy's influence grew. He collaborated quietly with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, ensuring the case addressed root causes. Torres built an airtight indictment, blending video evidence with Sullivan's history. National headlines amplified the story: Senator Kennedy's stand against police abuse sparks federal probe. Activists praised Kennedy's grace, turning him into a symbol of resilience. Sullivan's family fractured further. Linda filed for separation. Kids avoided calls. The union distanced itself, refusing to fund his defense. As the grand jury convened, Sullivan faced the mirror of his actions: a once untouchable captain, now a defendant in a federal conspiracy. Kennedy, by contrast, channeled the ordeal into positive action, drafting proposals for enhanced police training. The ripples widened, promising not just punishment, but lasting change. Yet, the deepest revelations were still to come, as the FBI peeled back layers of departmental rot that had festered for years. As the federal investigation into Captain Derek Sullivan's assault on Senator John Kennedy gained unstoppable momentum, the probe delved deeper into the rotten core of the Atlanta Police Department, revealing layers of corruption that had festered unchecked for years. What started as a single act of racist aggression in a dimly lit parking lot had ballooned into a full-scale federal scrutiny, with FBI agents combing through decades of records, interviewing reluctant witnesses, and unearthing a network of complicity that reached the highest ranks. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison Sullivan's longtime ally and enabler found himself squarely in the crosshairs. Morrison had risen through the ranks alongside Sullivan, sharing in the same old-school mentality that prioritized loyalty over law. But now emails and internal memos surfaced, showing Morrison signing off on dubious internal affairs reports, burying complaints, and even pressuring junior officers to alter statements in Sullivan's favor. This goes way beyond one bad apple Special Agent Jennifer Walsh declared in a briefing to the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're looking at a culture where misconduct was not just tolerated, but protected at every level. The evidence was overwhelming. Morrison had intervened in at least a dozen cases, ensuring Sullivan's patterns of excessive force and racial bias never saw real consequences. Subpoenas flew, dragging Morrison into interrogation rooms where his denials crumbled under the weight of digital trails and whistleblower testimonies. Officer Mike Torres, the rookie who had witnessed the assault firsthand, became a key informant. His body cam footage serving as the linchpin that connected isolated incidents into a conspiracy. Torres, motivated by a sense of duty that echoed Kennedy's own principles, detailed how Morrison had once warned him against rocking the boat on Sullivan's cases. The fallout was swift. Morrison was suspended, his badge confiscated, and charges of conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 241 loomed large, transforming him from a respected commander into a defendant fighting for his freedom. Senator John Kennedy, with his unwavering integrity and profound grasp of legislative mechanisms, played a pivotal role in steering the investigation toward meaningful reform. From his Senate office, Kennedy collaborated closely with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, advocating for a comprehensive pattern and practice review under 42 U.S.C. 114-104-1. This wasn't just about punishing individuals, it was about dismantling the systems that allowed such abuses to thrive. Kennedy's voice carried weight in these discussions. His personal experience lent authenticity to his calls for change, and his reputation for fairness made him a unifying figure across political lines. "We've seen too many cases where power corrupts those sworn to protect," Kennedy remarked in a statement to federal overseers. "True justice demands not only accountability, but transformation." Under his influence, the investigation expanded to scrutinize hiring practices, training protocols, and oversight failures that had enabled officers like Sullivan to operate with impunity. Federal monitors were appointed, led by Dr. Sarah Chen, a seasoned expert in police reform with a track record of turning troubled departments around. Chen's team descended on Atlanta, mandating immediate changes, mandatory body cameras for all officers to ensure transparency in every interaction, independent civilian oversight boards to review complaints without departmental bias, and rigorous training programs focused on civil rights de-escalation techniques and recognizing implicit bias. These reforms weren't optional. They came with the threat of withheld federal funding if not implemented swiftly. The department resisted at first. Union leaders grumbled about overreach, and some officers staged protests claiming the measures would handcuff their ability to do the job. But Kennedy's steady advocacy, amplified by national media coverage, shifted public opinion. Editorials praised his resilience, calling him a beacon of principled leadership in an era of division. Civil rights organizations rallied behind him, organizing town halls where victims of police misconduct shared stories that mirrored Sullivan's abuses, further pressuring the city to comply. The financial toll on Atlanta was staggering, with costs soaring into the tens of millions for new equipment training sessions and legal settlements from reopened cases. Mayor Patricia Johnson, facing a budget crisis, convened emergency council meetings to reallocate funds, cutting from other services to meet federal demands. This isn't just about one incident, she admitted in a press conference. It's about rebuilding trust in our institutions. Kennedy's impact extended beyond Atlanta. His testimony before congressional committees highlighted the need for nationwide standards inspiring bills that would require similar reforms for any agency receiving federal grants. He became a symbol of accountability. His calm demeanor during the assault replayed in news segments as a masterclass in dignity under duress. Senator Kennedy didn't just survive an attack, he turned it into a force for good one, commentator noted on CNN. As the reforms took hold, measurable changes emerged, excessive force complaints began to drop. As officers adapted to constant recording and community satisfaction surveys, showed early signs of improvement. Dr. Chen's reports detailed success stories like revamped training modules that incorporated real-world scenarios drawn from Sullivan's file teaching officers, the constitutional boundaries Kennedy had so expertly cited during the confrontation. But resistance lingered in pockets. Die-hard supporters of the old ways leaked memos criticizing the federal invasion only to face internal investigations that further cleansed the ranks. Kennedy, undeterred by the backlash, continued his work, drafting amendments to strengthen oversight laws and collaborating with bipartisan groups to ensure the reforms were sustainable. The investigation's expansion uncovered even more rot, implicating city officials who had turned a blind eye to the department's issues for political gain. Prosecutors who had declined to pursue cases against problem officers were questioned, and council members who blocked reform bills faced ethics probes. Sullivan, under house arrest awaiting trial, watched from afar as his former empire crumbled, his isolation deepening as colleagues flipped to save themselves. Foster's confession sealed deals for lighter sentences, detailing how Morrison had orchestrated cover-ups to maintain department unity. The grand jury indictments came down like hammer blows. U.S. v. Sullivan. Foster and Morrison charging them with conspiracy, deprivation of rights, hate crimes, and racketeering under multiple federal statutes. The racketeering angle painted their actions as an organized scheme with over 200 documented incidents of falsified reports and witness intimidation. Kennedy attended key hearings virtually, his presence a reminder of the human cost behind the legalese. His advocacy ensured that reforms weren't afterthoughts, but core to the resolution. Court-ordered mandates for the department included annual audits by independent firms and community input in policy changes. As Atlanta's police force grudgingly adapted, other cities took note, with departments nationwide implementing similar measures preemptively to avoid federal intervention. Kennedy's role elevated him to a national icon of reform, his speeches on accountability drawing crowds and inspiring young leaders. This isn't about punishment alone, he emphasized in one address. It's about building a system where every citizen, regardless of background, can trust those who serve. The chapter closed on a department in transition, but the true test lay ahead, ensuring these changes endured beyond the spotlight, a testament to Kennedy's enduring commitment to justice. Yet, as the reform solidified, the personal stories of those affected added depth to the narrative. Families victimized by Sullivan's past actions found closure through reopened cases, with settlements providing long-overdue compensation. Maria Rodriguez, whose son had suffered at Sullivan's hands years earlier, spoke at a reform hearing. Because of Senator Kennedy's courage, my family sees hope in a system that once failed us. Kennedy's influence rippled outward, shaping policies that mandated bias training nationwide and establishing federal grants for community policing initiatives. The Atlanta department, once a symbol of dysfunction, began earning praise for its transparency, with body cam footage now routinely reviewed by civilian panels. Protests against the changes faded as data showed reductions in use of force incidents, proving Kennedy's vision effective. Morrison's trial loomed, his defense crumbling under the evidence Walsh's team amassed. Sullivan, facing his own reckoning, contemplated the plea that would expose more his arrogance, finally broken by the inexorable march of federal justice. Kennedy, meanwhile, balanced his Senate duties with advisory roles on reform committees, his experience forging alliances that transcended politics. The systemic overhaul wasn't without challenges. Budget strains led to heated debates, and some officers resigned rather than adapt. But the momentum was irreversible. National outlets chronicled the transformation from assault to accountability. How Senator Kennedy's stand reshaped policing. As the department implemented independent monitors, trust rebuilt brick by brick, a direct legacy of Kennedy's principled stand. The investigation's scope now influenced federal guidelines, with Kennedy's input ensuring that no agency could ignore patterns of abuse. In this crucible of change, Atlanta emerged as a model, its reforms a blueprint for the nation, all sparked by one man's unyielding integrity in the face of aggression. The road to reform was long, but Kennedy's guidance lit the way, proving that true power lies not in force, but in the relentless pursuit of justice. In the cold, sterile confines of a federal courtroom, 8 months after that explosive confrontation in the Atlanta parking lot, Captain Derek Sullivan stood before Judge Thomas Bradley, his once imposing frame now hunched under the weight of impending doom. The room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists scribbled furiously, civil rights activists held signs of solidarity, and victims of Sullivan's long history of abuse sat in silent witness. Senator John Kennedy occupied a front-row seat not as a victim seeking vengeance, but as a symbol of unyielding integrity, his presence a quiet reminder that true authority stems from principle, not force. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres laid out the case with devastating clarity, presenting a mountain of evidence. The courthouse videos capturing every shove-and-shout whistleblower testimonies from officers like Torres, and a trail of 47 victim impact statements detailing the human toll of Sullivan's unchecked racism and brutality. Your Honor, Torres intoned, Derek Sullivan didn't just assault a senator, he wielded his badge as a weapon against the very Constitution he swore to uphold. He believed his authority placed him above the law, terrorizing citizens who couldn't fight back. Today, we prove him wrong. Sullivan's defense attorney pleaded for mercy, painting him as a product of a flawed system rather than its architect. But Judge Bradley, after reviewing the exhaustive record, saw through the facade. Mr. Sullivan Bradley declared from the bench, his voice echoing with the gravity of justice, "Your crimes erode the foundation of our democracy. Police officers who violate rights aren't protectors. They're predators in uniform. You are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, forfeiture of all assets gained through your corrupt career, and a permanent ban from any law enforcement role." The gavel's crack sealed Sullivan's fate, sending him to a facility housing disgraced officials, where his status as a fallen cop made him a target among inmates who had suffered at the hands of similar abusers. The sentences didn't stop with Sullivan. Lieutenant Michael Foster, the internal affairs fixer who had shielded him for years, received 10 years for his role in the conspiracy, his elaborate cover-ups unraveling under federal scrutiny. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, the enabler at the top, got 8 years, his promotions built on lies now exposed, as part of a racketeering scheme that had cost the city millions in hidden settlements. In total, 23 officers faced prosecution, the largest police corruption takedown in Georgia history, with penalties ranging from probation and fines for lesser enablers to multi-year terms for those deeply entangled. The courtroom verdicts led to more than personal justice. They sparked a sweeping overhaul of Atlanta's police department. Under federal oversight, the city adopted key reforms. Body cameras became mandatory, civilian boards reviewed all complaints, and officers underwent civil rights and bias training. The impact was dramatic. Use of force complaints dropped 67% in a year, and public trust rose by 45%. Though reforms cost over $50 million, they rebuilt trust and turned a broken system into a model of accountability. But the deeper lesson goes beyond numbers. This story proves that no one is above the law. Captain Sullivan's fall exposed how power abused in silence can finally be brought to justice. Senator John Kennedy's calm, principled response transformed personal injustice into systemic change. True leadership, he showed, is about integrity, not control. His story encourages all of us to demand oversight, speak up against injustice, and vote for reform-minded leaders. We must build a world where officers serve with empathy, where bias is confronted, and where accountability is the rule, not the exception. Kennedy's impact reached the national level. Serving on the Federal Advisory Committee on Police Reform, he helped pass the bipartisan Federal Police Accountability Act, requiring reforms like body cams and independent investigations for all federally funded agencies. The ripple effect reached 12 more departments, giving hope and healing to victims like Maria Rodriguez, whose son was once brutalized by Sullivan. What began as a racist attack ended in justice reform and inspiration. Kennedy remained humble, continuing his Senate work while inspiring a new generation to believe in the law's power. And Sullivan. He learned too late that disrespecting true authority carries lasting consequences. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of justice, courage, and integrity. And always remember, no one is above the law.